It was a Thursday evening, one of those quiet, predictable nights that should have felt ordinary, but didn't. The sky was fading into that soft, bruised blue that comes before nightfall, and I was standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup that neither of us would end up eating together. Daniel was leaning against the doorway, phone in hand, his expression calm but detached, the kind of detachment that doesn't shout but whispers something is wrong. He said the words casually, as though they carried no weight at all. "I'll be home late tonight, love. Big project deadline." It wasn't the first time I'd heard that excuse, but something in the way he said it, too smooth, too practiced, felt rehearsed. He'd been working late almost every night for the past month. At first, I'd brushed it off. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 5, and I'd always known him to be ambitious. Sometimes obsessively so. His dedication had been one of the things that drew me to him. But lately, it felt less like ambition and more like avoidance. When he came home, he'd seem distracted, scrolling through his phone, responding to work messages he never let me see. We hadn't had dinner together in weeks, hadn't talked about anything real, not bills, not weekend plans, not even each other. Just silence filled the spaces where love used to. That evening when he told me he'd be late again, I tried to sound supportive. I smiled, told him to take care, even packed a thermos of coffee for him like I used to. He thanked me with a quick kiss, one that barely grazed my lips. The scent of his cologne lingered longer than the kiss itself. Strong, heavy, deliberate, almost like he'd just applied it. That caught my attention. He never wore that particular cologne to work. It was the one he used on dates or special nights out. For a moment I almost asked why, but the words froze somewhere between my suspicion and my fear of hearing a truth I wasn't ready for. As he grabbed his keys, I noticed the small, telling details that would later replay in my mind like broken film. He avoided eye contact. His bag looked lighter than usual. No laptop bulge, no files sticking out. When I asked if he needed anything for his meeting, he hesitated just a beat too long before saying no. Then he smiled. That soft, automatic smile people wear when they're trying to end a conversation before it gets dangerous, and walked out the door. The sound of it closing felt heavier than it should have, like it sealed something between us that neither of us could name. I stood there for a while after he left, spoon still in hand, the soup simmering softly behind me. The house felt too still. I could hear the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint echo of his car pulling out of the driveway. I wanted to shake off the feeling, tell myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired. But unease has a way of settling into the bones. It doesn't scream, it lingers, quiet but constant, like a shadow that refuses to leave. I sat at the dining table, scrolling through old photos of us on my phone, smiling faces, vacations, lazy mornings in bed, fragments of a life that seemed both familiar and far away. I remembered how, just a year ago, we'd been talking about starting a family. He'd been so excited, or at least he'd seemed to be. But that enthusiasm had slowly faded, replaced by vague comments about timing and career goals. It wasn't that I didn't trust him, I had completely, but trust is fragile, and once cracks start to form, you start noticing everything. The way he guarded his phone, the sudden shower before bed, the new passwords, the faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine. That night, it all felt heavier. The silence in the house pressed down on me like fog. I tried to eat dinner, but every bite tasted wrong. I tried to watch TV, but every sound felt too loud. My mind kept circling back to that look on his face, calm, distant, calculated. I thought about calling him, asking if everything was okay, but what would I say? I don't believe you. You're acting strange? The moment those words left my mouth, they'd change everything. Once you start doubting, you can't unsee the signs. So instead, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe he really was working late. Maybe the cologne was just habit. Maybe I was overthinking because of stress. But the truth was, I didn't believe any of that. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. Not just with him, but with us. We'd become strangers living parallel lives, sharing a roof but not a connection. I missed him, but I also missed the version of myself who felt secure, loved, certain. I wandered into the living room, noticing his work laptop still sitting on the dining table, the same one he supposedly needed for his late-night project. My pulse quickened. That didn't make sense. I reached out and touched it, as if expecting it to explain itself. The screen was dark, the charger unplugged. A part of me wanted to open it, to look for answers. But another part, the part that still clung to the hope that I was wrong, stopped me. I told myself I was imagining things again, that maybe he'd borrowed someone else's computer, that there was an innocent explanation. Yet, even as I tried to believe that, I knew my own excuses sounded hollow. The longer I sat there, the more uneasy I felt. There's something about betrayal, even before it's confirmed, that your body senses before your mind accepts it. My chest felt tight, my throat dry, my thoughts restless. I wanted proof, something tangible, something that would either shatter my world or save it. But for that moment, all I had was doubt, thick, suffocating doubt that wrapped itself around every memory, every promise, every "I love you" that suddenly didn't feel real. When the clock hit 9 hours and p.m. and there was still no call, no text, no update, I started pacing. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a warning. I told myself he was just busy. But busy people still find time to say goodnight. Busy husbands still come home with tired eyes, not with excuses. And in that dimly lit kitchen, I realized that something between us had already shifted. Maybe long before that night. The trust that once anchored me was slipping away, and in its place was a rising tide of questions I wasn't ready to face. That was the first moment I felt it, the quiet dread that something sacred was breaking. I didn't have proof yet. No GPS pin, no confrontation, just a single sentence. "I'll be home late tonight." Simple, ordinary words that now felt like the beginning of an ending I hadn't seen coming. And even though I didn't know it then, that single moment, that single excuse, would be the first step toward discovering a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and myself. After Daniel left that night, the house seemed to swallow me whole. The sound of the door clicking shut lingered in my ears longer than it should have, like a punctuation mark at the end of something I didn't realize was over. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the faint glow of his taillights disappear into the darkness. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that should have been comforting but instead made the air feel heavy. I told myself to stop thinking too much, to trust him like I always had, but trust doesn't obey commands, it slips through your fingers when it senses danger. I tried to distract myself with small things. I wiped the counter that was already clean, checked my phone for messages I knew wouldn't come, and rearranged the cushions on the couch. Each movement felt mechanical, an act of pretending that everything was normal when every fiber of me knew it wasn't. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every passing minute, mocking me for counting the seconds. I hated how aware I was of the time, how each moment he didn't text made my stomach twist tighter. When I couldn't bear the silence anymore, I turned on the TV. Some sitcom was playing, characters laughing over canned applause, but the noise only made the emptiness worse. I muted it and stared at the screen, not really seeing anything. I thought about how we used to spend nights like this together. Him on the couch with his laptop, me beside him with a book. We'd share glances, little smiles, the comfort of knowing that even in silence, we were together. Those evenings had disappeared slowly, like sunlight fading before you notice it's gone. Now all that was left was the shadow of routine. I wandered into the dining room, and that's when I saw it, his work laptop sitting on the table, the same one he carried with him every day. It was right there, closed neatly beside his charger. My heartbeat stumbled. That didn't make sense. He'd said he had a big project, that he'd be working late at the office, but the one thing he needed for that, the laptop, was here. I walked closer, half hoping I was wrong, that maybe it was an old one, or that he'd borrowed another. But I knew every scratch on that laptop, the tiny dent in the corner from when he dropped it months ago. It was definitely him. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at it as if it could explain itself. Rational thoughts began fighting to surface. Maybe he was doing something else at the office, something that didn't require the laptop. Maybe he had a desktop there. Maybe he just forgot. But Daniel never forgot that laptop. It was practically glued to him, the lifeline of his job. He once drove back home in the middle of the night because he thought he'd left it behind. The fact that he'd left it so carelessly now made the hairs on my arms rise. My chest tightened. Something felt wrong in a way that couldn't be brushed away with excuses. I pulled out a chair and sat down, staring at the device as though it were a clue in a mystery I didn't want to solve. My thoughts were racing, connecting dots I didn't want to see forming a picture. His late nights, his sudden distance, the way he guarded his phone like it held state secrets. The faint perfume I'd caught on his shirt once, a scent I didn't own. I tried to calm myself. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, that suspicion could twist anything into guilt. But deep down I felt that low hum of intuition that all women know, the one that whispers when something isn't right, no matter how much you want to deny it. I'd felt it for weeks, maybe months, but had buried it under rationalizations and faith in the man I loved. That faith was starting to crack. The clock read 9:07 p.m. He should have texted by now. Usually, even on late nights, he'd send a quick message. Still working, or don't wait up. But my phone screen stayed blank, silent and cold. I picked it up anyway, scrolling through our old messages, each one feeling like it belonged to another couple. There were jokes, little I miss you notes, pictures of dinner plates and sunsets. They felt distant now, like relics from a happier life. My thumb hovered over his contact, tempted to call to hear his voice and ask where he really was. But fear held me back, not fear of his reaction, but fear of confirming what I already suspected. Once you start asking those questions, you can't go back. The moment you say, "Where are you really?" you've admitted out loud that something is broken. And I wasn't ready for that. So instead, I sat there and stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. My thoughts circled around one question: why lie? If he didn't want to be home, why not just say so? If he was tired of me, why not admit it? Lies are cowardly things. They grow in silence, feeding on the hope that the other person won't notice. But I noticed. I had been noticing for a long time. The room around me felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window, a woman trying to hold on to reason when her world was slipping through her fingers. My mind flashed back to all the nights he'd said he was working late, and I realized I'd never once verified it. I just believed him. I'd wanted to believe him because love teaches you to trust before you question, but love also makes you blind until you're forced to see. I stood up, restless, pacing between the table and the living room. Every few steps, I'd glance at his laptop, like it might suddenly open and reveal a secret. I could have checked it, easily. His password was simple, our anniversary date. But the thought of invading his privacy made me feel sick. I didn't want to become someone who snooped, someone desperate. Yet wasn't I already that person? Wasn't my doubt already proof that something inside me had changed? At some point I ended up sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor, lost in thought. I remembered the early days of our marriage, the way he used to text me in the middle of his meetings, just to say he was thinking about me, the way he'd come home, tired but still smiling, pulling me into his arms like I was his refuge. When had that stopped? I couldn't pinpoint the moment, but it had faded gradually, replaced by polite smiles and half-hearted conversations. The sound of the clock ticking grew louder again, 9:30. Still nothing. That's when the unease inside me sharpened into something colder, more focused. I realized that no matter how much I tried to rationalize, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. It wasn't just a hunch, it was the quiet certainty of instinct. My mind whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. He wasn't at work. He wasn't sitting in some sterile office under fluorescent lights. He was somewhere else, doing something else. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I looked around at the familiar things in our home, the framed photos, the shared books, the little souvenirs from trips we'd taken. They all seemed to mock me now. Reminders of promises that might have already been broken. I wanted to believe this was just paranoia, that I was being irrational. But sometimes the body knows what the mind refuses to admit. So I sat there, frozen between denial and revelation, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. And though I didn't yet open the tracking app, didn't yet look for his location, I already knew that moment was coming. Because once suspicion takes root, it grows fast, and the need for truth, no matter how painful, becomes impossible to resist. That was the night I stopped trusting words and started listening to the silence between them. The moment I opened the tracking app on my phone, my hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. It wasn't something I planned to do, it was an impulse that came from a place deeper than logic, born out of that sickening mix of fear and curiosity. The kind that gnaws at you until you give in. I stared at the screen for a long time before even tapping it, hesitating as if by not looking, I could keep my world intact. But deep down, I already knew that once I did, there would be no going back. I would either find relief or I would find the truth I'd been trying to avoid. When the app finally loaded, the small circular icon representing Daniel's phone began blinking, searching for a signal. I held my breath, praying it would show him at his office, maybe still at work like he said. That would make everything fine again, wouldn't it? The map refreshed, and the little blue dot appeared. But my stomach turned when I saw it wasn't where it was supposed to be. He wasn't anywhere near his office. He was on the other side of town. At first, I thought maybe it was a glitch. Technology isn't perfect. Sometimes it lags, sometimes it pins the wrong location. So I refreshed it once, then twice, then again. Each time, the same result. The dot blinked steadily in a quiet residential neighborhood I didn't recognize by name, but knew by area, a place about 30 minutes from home. He had no clients there, no reason to be there that I could think of. I zoomed in closer, the way someone leans in to hear a whisper they're afraid of. The map sharpened, and I saw the name of the street. That was when my pulse began to race. It wasn't just any street. I recognized it because I'd been there before, not recently but enough times to remember the turnoff, the corner shop, the little park across the way. My vision blurred for a moment as realizations started to take shape, blurry at first, then sharper than glass. The dot was parked in front of a small house, a familiar one. My chest tightened until it felt hard to breathe. It was Laura's address. My best friend. My fingers went cold, the phone suddenly heavy in my hand. I stared at the screen, hoping it was a mistake, some bizarre coincidence, but the evidence was right there. His car, his phone, his location, stationary at her house. My brain tried to deny what my heart already knew. Maybe he'd stopped by for something innocent. Maybe he was helping her with something. Maybe she needed advice, or a favor, or anything other than the truth that was slowly dawning on me. But even as I tried to piece together impossible explanations, my memory started betraying me with tiny details I had brushed aside before. The way Laura had asked more about Daniel lately, the subtle interest in her tone when his name came up, the sudden closeness between them whenever we were together, the quick glances, the easy laughter, the way she complimented him more than she ever had before. I had noticed, but I had chosen not to see, and now every ignored sign came back like a knife twisting in my chest. The phone screen dimmed, and I tapped it back to life, just to make sure the dot was still there. Unmoving, still at her house. The world felt suddenly very small, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, so loud it drowned out everything else. I tried to think, to breathe, to decide what to do, but every thought got tangled in emotion. Anger, disbelief, humiliation, they all flooded me at once. My mind flashed with images I didn't want, Daniel's hands on her, his voice whispering the same lies to her that he'd once whispered to me. I felt sick. I got up and paced around the room, still holding the phone, unable to tear my eyes from that little blue dot. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I couldn't let go of it. It was the only proof I had, the only thing anchoring me to the reality I didn't want to face. I sat down again, clutching it in my palm, staring as if staring hard enough would make it change. But it didn't. It stayed exactly where it was. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time felt meaningless. I kept thinking he would move, that the dot would suddenly start heading toward home, that maybe this was some huge misunderstanding, but it didn't move. And with every minute that passed, my denial began to crumble. My breathing grew shallow, my chest aching from the pressure building inside. I tried to remember the last time I'd really looked at him, really seen him, and realized I couldn't recall it. He'd been slipping away so slowly that I hadn't noticed until he was gone. I thought about Laura again, my confidant, my sister in everything but blood. She'd been there through every major moment of my life, my wedding, my hardships, my happiness. She'd cried with me, laughed with me. And now, the thought of her laughing with him behind my back made me feel like the ground was giving way beneath me. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was hers too. The two people I trusted most in the world were together, somewhere I wasn't supposed to see. I wanted to call her, to demand an explanation. I wanted to call him, to scream, to ask how he could do this. But I didn't. I just sat there, frozen. It wasn't courage or calm that kept me still, it was shock, the kind that settles deep into your bones, the kind that makes your hands go numb and your voice disappear. My mind was racing through every memory of them together, searching for clues, realizing they had been there all along, the jokes, the sudden inside references I didn't understand, the way they sometimes texted while we were all together, pretending it was nothing. I remembered the last time Laura had come over for dinner. She'd worn a new perfume that lingered after she left. A few nights later I had caught that same faint scent on Daniel's jacket, but had dismissed it, thinking maybe she'd hugged him goodbye. Now I understood that it wasn't an accident. That scent had followed him because she had. The thought made me dizzy. The map was still open in front of me, that blinking dot almost taunting me now. I zoomed in again, closer and closer, until I could see the shape of her street, the neighboring houses, the small tree in her front yard. My imagination filled in the rest, the warm light spilling from her windows, maybe the sound of laughter, the way he probably felt at ease there, free from the lies he told me. The more I thought about it, the more I felt something inside me hard. The sadness started to give way to something sharper, colder. Clarity. I realized that whatever I chose to do next would change everything. I couldn't pretend anymore. The ignorance I'd clung to for safety was gone. I could either confront it or walk away, but I couldn't unsee the truth glowing back at me from that little screen. It was strange how such a small digital symbol, a single blue dot, could hold so much destruction inside it. Eventually, I put the phone down, staring at it from across the table like it was something poisonous. My pulse was still racing, but my mind had gone eerily quiet. I felt like I'd stepped outside of myself, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity, it was about trust, about the lies that slowly replaced love without me even noticing. In that moment, as I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, the truth settled in fully. My marriage wasn't just breaking, it had already broken. I had been clinging to a ghost of what we used to be, while he had already moved on, parked in front of another woman's house. And not just any woman, my best friend. That realization, more than anything else, made me feel like I might actually pass out, because it wasn't just the end of love, it was the end of everything I believed in. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like hours, unable to believe what I was seeing. The map didn't lie. The blue dot pulsed steadily on a small suburban street, one I knew better than I wanted to admit. My throat tightened as I zoomed in closer and saw the address spelled out clearly at the top of the screen. My mind repeated it over and over, and the more I stared, the more the pieces began to fall into place with painful precision. It was Laura's address. My best friend, the woman who knew everything about me, my fears, my insecurities, my marriage, even the arguments Daniel and I had been having lately. She was the one I turned to when things felt hard, the one who always told me I deserved honesty, loyalty, and now, my husband's GPS signal was sitting at her house. For a few moments, I just sat there in silence, hoping that somehow there was an innocent reason. Maybe Daniel had gone there to drop something off for her. Maybe she needed help with something urgent. Maybe it was just a coincidence, a wrong pin, a glitch in the app. I kept trying to build excuses for them because the alternative was too unbearable to face. But the longer I stared at that little blinking dot, unmoving, the harder it became to pretend. The truth was staring right back at me, cold and undeniable. A deep chill ran through me, starting in my chest and spreading through my whole body. I could feel my heart beating too fast, the kind of pounding that made it hard to think clearly. My breathing grew shallow. Every logical thought I tried to grab onto slipped away, replaced by flashes of memory, her laugh, his smile, their shared jokes that I used to think were harmless. I began to realize that there had always been signs, tiny cracks in the surface that I'd ignored because I trusted them both. That was my mistake. Trusting them completely had left me defenseless. I remembered the first time the three of us had gone out for dinner together. Laura had made Daniel laugh so hard he nearly spilled his drink, and I'd laughed along, happy to see them get along. Later, I caught her looking at him when she thought I wasn't watching. It wasn't a long look, but it lingered just enough to make me notice. I had brushed it off, convincing myself I was being silly, jealous even. After all, she was my friend, she would never cross that line. But now, as I sat staring at that location pin, those moments came flooding back, sharper and more painful with every recollection. I tried to remember the last few times I'd seen her. Just 2 weeks ago, she'd stopped by with coffee and pastries, chatting about work and life as if nothing was wrong. She'd asked how Daniel was holding up with all his late nights, and then smiled in a way that felt awe. At the time I thought it was just my imagination, but now it felt like that smile had been a secret mocking me. She must have known where he really was when she asked those questions. She must have known I'd believe her, because why wouldn't I? That was what hurt the most, the effortless way they'd both made me feel safe while they betrayed me. The ache in my chest deepened as anger began to bubble beneath the surface. I clenched my phone so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I wanted to drive to that address, to storm up to her door and see for myself. I wanted to look both of them in the eye and force them to say it, to confess, but at the same time I was terrified, because once I saw it with my own eyes, once I heard their voices together, there would be no pretending, no going back. My marriage, my friendship, my entire sense of what was real, it would all collapse at once. The room around me seemed smaller, the air thicker. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the faint sound of traffic outside. I could barely sit still. I opened the app again, refreshed it, hoping for a miracle. The blue dot hadn't moved. It was still there, still at her house, still breaking my heart with every blink. My mind went into overdrive, trying to imagine what they were doing. Were they sitting together, talking in whispers? Were they laughing about something I said earlier that week? Or were they in her bedroom, wrapped in a lie they'd carefully built behind my back? The images came uninvited, cruel and vivid, until I couldn't stand them anymore. I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to hold back the sob that threatened to escape. My vision blurred with tears, but I refused to cry fully. Crying would make it real. Crying meant accepting it. Instead, I tried to reason again, desperately clinging to hope. Maybe Daniel had stopped by to pick something up for me. Maybe Laura had called him because she needed help moving something heavy or fixing something in her house. But then I remembered she hadn't mentioned any of that. And even if she had, why hadn't he told me? Why the lies about working late? Why the cologne? Why the growing distance? The truth kept circling back like a predator. I just didn't want to look it in the eye. I thought about the way he'd been leaving the house lately. That morning, he'd been wearing the same hoodie I'd seen Laura borrow months ago, the one she said was super comfortable. It had seemed like a harmless detail at the time. Now it felt like a warning I'd missed. I remembered him being quieter, more withdrawn, always checking his phone, always stepping outside to take work calls. And Laura, she'd started reaching out more, texting me at odd hours, asking casual questions about Daniel's schedule, pretending it was friendly curiosity. How could I have been so blind? The clock struck 10, and still his location didn't move. My mind began to spiral. What if I drove there right now? What if I knocked on her door and caught them together? Would he try to deny it? Would she cry and apologize? Or would she look at me with that smug half-smile and say nothing? I imagined all the possible versions of that confrontation, each one worse than the last. Part of me wanted to see it, to have the truth ripped open so I could stop wondering. Another part of me wanted to stay right there, in my living room, in the fragile space where I could still pretend I didn't know. The betrayal of a friend cuts deeper than almost anything else. A friend knows your weaknesses, your fears, your secrets, and when that friend uses that knowledge to take something from you, it's like being stabbed with your own trust. That was what Laura had done. She had sat in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, nodding as I told her how distant Daniel had become, and all the while, she already knew why. I thought about how she had told me to be patient with him, how she'd smiled knowingly and said, "Men get stressed sometimes, it doesn't mean anything." Now I could see the hidden meaning in every word she'd said. She'd been protecting herself, not me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't something that had just happened. It had been building slowly, right in front of me. Every lie, every excuse, every shared glance between them had been a thread in the web they were spinning, and I had been standing in the middle of it, oblivious. That thought made me feel sick to my stomach. By the time the clock read 10:30, I was numb. The tears had dried before they even had the chance to fall. I stared at the phone one last time, at that small pulsing dot that had shattered my entire world. The quiet of the house felt heavier than ever, pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to prove. The truth was right there, undeniable and cruel. My husband wasn't working late. He was at another woman's house. My best friend's house. And with that realization came the understanding that everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and friendship had been nothing more than an illusion I'd been desperately clinging to. The drive there was a blur. I remember my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, but I couldn't feel them. The world outside my car window passed by in fragments, streetlights bleeding into streaks of gold, cars that I barely registered, the soft hum of the tires on the asphalt that seemed distant, almost unreal. My heart was pounding, but everything else was muted, like I was underwater. I didn't even think about what I'd say when I got there. I just knew I couldn't sit still any longer. The longer I stayed at home, the more the silence was suffocating me, wrapping around me like something alive. I needed to see for myself. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. As I drove, my mind kept replaying images of Daniel and Laura together, every laugh, every small moment they'd shared in my presence, every word that I'd brushed off as harmless, all of it looped through my head like a cruel film reel. I hated that I could imagine it so vividly, hated that it made sense now in ways it never had before. The GPS still glowed on my passenger seat, the blue dot fixed in one place. It was proof that this wasn't just suspicion anymore, this was happening. When I turned onto Laura's street, my pulse quickened until it was almost unbearable. It was late, close to midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, houses lined up neatly under the pale orange glow of streetlights. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, as though the world wasn't about to break apart for me. I slowed the car as I approached her house, my headlights sweeping across the familiar white fence and the small flower bed she'd always been so proud of. Then I saw it. His car parked right outside her driveway. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I just stared. My breath caught in my throat, and it felt like my body went cold all over. There it was, unmistakable. Daniel's car, the same dent on the back bumper, the same sticker on the window. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Every desperate excuse I'd built up in my mind crumbled right then. My husband wasn't at work. He was right there, parked outside my best friend's house. I don't even remember turning off the engine, but suddenly I was standing on the sidewalk staring at the house. The lights were on inside, soft and warm, spilling out through the curtains. My legs felt heavy, but they moved anyway. Each step toward the door felt like wading through water. I didn't have a plan. I didn't think about consequences or explanations. I just needed to see their faces, to hear whatever lies they had left to tell me. My hands were shaking as I raised them to knock. For a moment I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run back to my car and drive away, pretend I never saw any of it. But the other part, the part that had been broken and lied to, needed closure. I knocked once, hard. The sound echoed through the still night. I could hear faint movement inside, footsteps, maybe voices. Then the door opened. Laura stood there. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a brief second I saw guilt flash across her face before she tried to cover it with surprise. She was wearing a hoodie. His hoodie, the gray one I'd seen him wear countless times, the one that smelled like his cologne. My breath hitched. My mind went completely blank, except for one overwhelming thought. This was real. All of it. I didn't speak at first. Neither did she. The air between us was thick with something I couldn't name. Shock, betrayal, shame. I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way she opened her mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. Then, from behind her, I heard a voice I knew better than my own. "Who is it?" Daniel appeared in the doorway, wearing a look that shifted from confusion to horror in the space of a heartbeat. He froze when he saw me. His face went pale, his lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. It was the kind of silence that says everything. He didn't need to explain, the truth was already written across his expression. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why, to demand answers for every lie he'd told me, for every late night, every false word, but nothing came out. The rage I'd expected to feel was replaced by something heavier, colder, a deep, hollow numbness that made it hard to even breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in, and I could feel tears burning at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Laura looked between us helplessly, as if she was trying to decide what to say, but there was nothing she could say that would make this better. I could see that she wanted to speak, to explain, to justify, but every possible explanation would only make it worse. I just shook my head slowly. My voice, when it finally came, was quiet but steady. "I guess this is where he's been working late." Daniel's eyes dropped to the floor. He didn't even try to deny it. He didn't say a word, not a plea, not an apology. Maybe he knew that any excuse would only add insult to the wound. Or maybe he'd already made peace with what he'd done. Either way, the silence between us was deafening. For a long moment, I just stood there, looking at the two people who had destroyed everything I thought was real. I thought about every memory I'd shared with them, birthdays, holidays, movie nights, laughter. They were all tainted now, rewritten by the betrayal standing in front of me. My best friend and my husband, the two people I loved most, together, behind my back. I felt something inside me break, quietly, like a thread snapping. But instead of shattering, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. I realized there was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. The truth was already out, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. I didn't want to hear apologies. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want to stay long enough for them to try to twist it into something forgivable. Without another word, I turned around. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked back down the path, but I didn't look back. My steps felt heavy but certain. The cold air hit my face, sharp and clean, as if reminding me that the world was still moving, even when mine had just come apart. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly that it took me a moment to get the keys into the ignition. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like me. It was someone else, someone hollowed out. As I drove away, I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come, not yet. I felt like I'd been emptied out completely, like there was nothing left inside to feel. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, but it was better than the suffocating air of that house. I didn't know where I was going. Home didn't feel like home anymore, but I knew I couldn't go back there. That night I realized something I'd never understood before. Sometimes the worst heartbreak doesn't explode in anger or noise. It happens in silence, in the quiet moments after the truth reveals itself, in the way you walk away from someone you thought would be your forever without looking back. Because deep down, you know there's no point. The person you love doesn't exist anymore, not in the way you thought they did. As I drove through the empty streets, the image of that doorway replayed in my mind, the way Laura's face had crumbled, the way Daniel had looked at me like he'd already lost me long before that moment. And maybe he had. Maybe I'd lost him the first time he lied, or the first time he chose her. But now, finally, it was over. And as the city lights blurred past my windshield, I realized that my silence wasn't weakness. It was strength, because sometimes the loudest way to end something is to simply walk away. The world felt strangely still when I walked back to my car. The sound of my footsteps on the pavement seemed too loud, too clear, echoing in the quiet night. Behind me, the lights from Laura's house spilled weakly across the driveway, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I turned around, I might have crumbled. I might have screamed, or fallen apart, or begged for an explanation I already knew would mean nothing. So I kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, but it was also the only thing keeping me upright. The night air was cold, sharp against my face, but it felt cleansing in a cruel kind of way. It reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of moving forward even after what I had just seen. When I got into my car, my hands were trembling so hard that I had to grip the steering wheel just to stop them. The silence inside was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. For a long time, I just sat there, staring blankly ahead. My mind was a whirl of images. The look on Daniel's face when he saw me at the door, Laura standing there in his hoodie, the guilty flicker in both their eyes. It wasn't anger that hit me first, it was disbelief. Even after seeing it with my own eyes, some part of me refused to accept that the people I loved most could have done this. It was like my brain was trying to protect me from the truth by pretending it wasn't real. But the more I sat there, the more that thin layer of denial began to peel away. I had always thought that betrayal would come with shouting, with chaos, with the sound of something breaking, but instead it came in silence, in the quiet realization that the person you'd built your life around had been building another life without you. It came in the stillness of that house, in the look on Daniel's face that said everything without a single word. That look will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't defiance or even apology, it was resignation. He knew he'd been caught, and there was nothing left to say. For a while I didn't drive anywhere. I just sat there watching the faint mist of my breath fog up the window, listening to my own heartbeat. My phone buzzed once on the passenger seat, a message, probably from him. I couldn't bring myself to look. Whatever he had to say, it wouldn't undo what I had seen. Words lose their meaning when actions have already told the truth. So I let it buzz, then fall silent again. I looked at the house one last time, the same house where I had shared so many memories with Laura, birthday parties, wine nights, endless laughter. Now even the sight of it made me feel hollow. How quickly something familiar can turn into a monument of pain. When I finally started the car, the sound of the engine startled me. The street stretched out ahead, empty and dimly lit. I drove slowly at first. Not because of caution, but because I didn't know where I was going. Home felt like a foreign word now. What was home if the person waiting there had already chosen someone else? My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I turned corner after corner, aimless. It was as though my body needed motion, needed to keep moving just to stop my mind from spiraling. I thought about the last few years of our marriage. The quiet mornings over coffee, the lazy Sunday afternoons, the small, meaningless arguments that had always seemed so important at the time. I tried to pinpoint the moment when things had started to fall apart, but it was impossible. It hadn't been one moment. It had been a slow, quiet drift. Love doesn't vanish in a single night. It fades, piece by piece, until one day you wake up beside a stranger who knows your favorite songs and your deepest fears, but doesn't love you anymore. Maybe that was what happened to us. Maybe he had stopped loving me long before he ever touched her. As I drove through the sleeping city, the weight of everything began to settle in my chest. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity, it was about the loss of trust, the death of certainty. I had believed in him so completely that I'd built my world around his promises, and now, standing in the ruins of that belief, I realized how fragile it had all been. It wasn't just Daniel and Laura I had lost, it was the version of myself who believed love was unbreakable. The tears finally came somewhere along the empty highway. They started slowly, one or two, then all at once, unstoppable. I didn't sob or wail, it was quieter than that, almost peaceful. The kind of crying that comes from exhaustion more than sadness. I didn't even pull over, I just let them fall, my vision blurring, as I followed the curve of the road. It was strange, but in that moment, the pain almost felt pure, honest in a way that everything else hadn't been. Lies can't touch you once you've accepted the truth. Eventually, I found myself pulling into a parking lot near the river. I turned off the engine and sat there in the dark, listening to the faint sound of water in the distance. The moonlight reflected on the surface, rippling softly. It reminded me that life goes on, even when your world stops. The river doesn't care about broken vows or shattered trust, it just keeps moving forward. Maybe that's what I needed to learn to do too. I thought about what would come next, the inevitable conversations, the unraveling of our shared life, the painful logistics of separation. But for the first time, the thought didn't scare me. It hurt, yes, but there was also a strange sense of clarity underneath it. I had always believed that endings had to be dramatic, full of noise and chaos. But as I sat there in the quiet, I realized that sometimes the strongest way to end something is with silence, with a decision to simply stop giving energy to what's already broken. When I finally looked at my phone, there were several missed calls and a string of messages. I didn't read them. I deleted them all without opening a single one. There was nothing he could say that I needed to hear. Apologies wouldn't fix it. Promises wouldn't erase it. Love once betrayed never returns the same. It comes back smaller, thinner, like something that's been stretched too far, and I didn't want the version of love that required me to forget what I'd seen. I sat there until the sky began to lighten, the faint gray of dawn creeping across the horizon. The night had been long, endless, but it was finally giving way to morning. There was something poetic about that. The idea that even after the darkest hours, light still returns. It doesn't fix what's broken, but it reminds you that there's still more ahead, that you're still here. When I drove home, the streets were empty, the world still quiet. The house felt cold when I walked inside, as if it already knew. I didn't touch anything. I didn't cry again. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint imprint of where he used to sleep. I knew he'd come back eventually, and maybe he'd try to explain, to beg, to lie again. But I also knew that nothing he said would matter. Some words can't rebuild what actions have destroyed. That morning, as the first light slipped through the curtains, I felt something shift inside me, not peace, not forgiveness, but strength. I realized that sometimes survival isn't about fighting or yelling or demanding answers. It's about walking away quietly, about choosing dignity over destruction. Because when love dies, silence is the only thing that honors what it once was. And that was how it ended. Not with a storm, not with shouting, but with a decision, a quiet, final understanding that I couldn't stay, that my silence, my leaving, would say everything words never could. And in that silence, I found a strange kind of freedom. The kind that comes when you finally stop chasing what's already gone.